Welcome to the Scrutineers series. I'm Emily Levy, founder and director of Scrutineers.org. I'm delighted to be collaborating with whowhatwhy.org to introduce a series of election protection podcasts designed to help you understand the risk to our elections, from voter suppression to lack of security. We'll be talking about what you can do to protect the voters and protect the votes. We're training a fairness force to help make sure no one stops you from voting and all votes are counted accurately. The state of Georgia drew national attention this year for its close presidential election, along with the combination of recount, recanvass, and risk-limiting audit in that race, which resulted in none of those processes following appropriate laws or procedures. And then it's recount. There's no rest for weary election officials, election workers, and election protectors in the state. Not only do they have the January 5th Senate runoff elections to prepare for, which will determine the balance of power in the Senate, but some parts of the state have another runoff election between now and then. Meanwhile, the sudden Republican objections to use of the state's new Dominican election system echo concerns that have been not only raised but litigated for years by the Coalition for Good Governance, the group whose lawsuit resulted in ending the state's use of insecure, hackable, riggable, direct record electronic touchscreen voting systems. Their litigation is still in process, and it's already resulted in a number of preliminary rulings as well as some disturbing findings in the discovery phase. Lawsuits are an important tool in the election protection toolbox that we haven't discussed much on the Scrutineers series until today. I'm delighted to introduce to you today my guest, Jean Dufort, who is a volunteer with the Coalition for Good Governance in Georgia and has been doing this work for 3 years. I'm so impressed by the group's work, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be here today, especially in such a busy election season.
It's great to be with you. Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about what the Coalition for Good Governance is to start off with. How is it different from other groups that are out there, and what is its focus?
The Coalition for Good Governance's unique focus is on ending electronic vote suppression. We're a very small nonprofit. We get super in the weeds about election processes and election law. We bring top first-class experts to bear on it. So we have an impact. Some people say we bat above, our pay grade, right? We've had tremendous success in the courts in bringing some equity to Georgia, but we're probably best known for the ongoing 3-year legal saga that already wound up with. We're probably best known for the 3-year litigation in federal court that has already resulted in banning the Georgia election system, the old one, and now we're working to get the new system ruled out on similar constitutional grounds. So that's pretty legendary. There's never been a statewide system that's been banned by a federal court judge.
And most states don't have a statewide system. So that's a unique thing about Georgia. So tell our listeners what the old system is that you got banned and why you went after it. So let's start there to give some context.
Sure. And to give you even a little further context, before 20 years ago, Georgia was the wild, wild west of elections. We have 159 counties, and we had at least 25 different ways of accounting for votes. It was very hard to wrestle it all together and have a statewide count that you really trusted. After the hanging Chad thing in Florida, there was a wave nationally to go electronic. And that's when Georgia made the decision under Kathy Cox, the Democratic Secretary of State, to bring in DREs, the direct recording devices.
Which are also known as touchscreen voting machines.
Touchscreens, but touchscreens without any printed piece of paper. So once you voted, once you saw your vote on your screen and you hit vote, it cast your ballot and it went into a black hole, right? So within 3 or 4 years of Georgia spending all that money on it, it was already becoming clear that there were serious security problems with this way of voting. And in fact, a trend started to go back to hand-marked paper ballots nationally, but Georgia hung on and hung on and hung on. And by the time Georgia finally was ready to give it up, we got it banned. The system had not even been supported by Microsoft for years. So the security level of it was just appalling.
And so you say it as though it's just like, oh, we filed a lawsuit and it got banned, but actually this is a lawsuit that's gone on for a really long time. Do you want to tell any about that?
Yeah. So I mean, basically, we put together a picture for this federal judge that explained the essence of the finding was that we have a federal right to understand and know and have confidence that our votes are counted as cast. And with the DRE machines, that was simply impossible to verify for voters. Just beginning and end of, I mean, there's a very long story and lots of filings and lots of hearings, but that's the essence of it, right? Is that voters need to be able to have confidence that the vote they cast is what wound up getting counted.
And then when the DREs were banned, was there a system that that Coalition for Good Governance was promoting? And is that the system that Georgia went with to replace the DREs? We
believe very simply that the less tech you have in voting, the safer you are. Rich DeMillo of Georgia Tech is one of the smartest guys I know. He was once the chief technology officer of Hewlett-Packard, and he's just opening up a whole new school for cybersecurity and elections at Georgia Tech. So very smart guy. And he explained it to me very simply one day, because, we're in a world where electronics are our life. You and I are communicating thanks to electronics right now, right? Yep. So our intuition is electronics make things easier. But in fact, every company, and Rich does a lot of work with big corporations, huge corporations, multinational corporations, every company that has to protect data expects to not only make an upfront investment in protecting that data, but an ongoing investment, a significant ongoing investment, guarding against what he calls advanced persistent threats. That is, the attack is evolving. Every day there's a new day with some new attack coming, and you've got to constantly spend money to guard on that. And as he explains it, in years of working with election folks, governments don't want to spend large amounts of money on an ongoing basis on elections. And so we're just fundamentally unable to comprehend how we would publicly fund an election system that would be fully prepared to adapt itself to these advanced persistent threats. And if you're not prepared to do that, you ought to get off the playing field and simply not put your vote in a place where it can be hacked.
Makes sense to me, and that I've never heard it described that way, and that actually makes a lot of sense, because government agencies tend to fund the purchase of things, and then we don't have that kind of follow-up funding. And in fact, a lot of small counties don't even have an IT person who can install upgrades if they're made. So updates to a system.
Two Georgia examples. First of all, the system that got replaced was 18 years old. Think about that.
Which in computer years is what, 600.
A lifetime. But here's the crazy part. When Georgia made the decision to buy the new ballot marking device system, it financed it on a 20-year note. Georgia taxpayers borrowed money for 20 years for a system that's comprised of tablets, printers, and scanners, which have a shelf life of maybe 5 years.
Wow.
So the mentality really...
As I understand it, sorry. And as I understand it, the new ballot marking device system is also run on software that is already outdated at the time it was purchased, isn't that?
So the problem of that, I used to be in the manufacturing business, not in the high-tech manufacturing business, but still I understand the mentality of manufacturing and supply chain distribution. One of the problems is our system of getting election equipment approved at a federal level, and it has to be certified to use it, is so cumbersome that it disincentivizes the people who are manufacturing that and bringing that to market from constantly upgrading and staying constant. So two forces are working against one another.
Interesting. So tell us about this new ballot marking device system that Georgia bought for the whole state.
So essentially, all you need to know about it is we decided that a $3,000 set of a tablet and a printer ought to replace a $1 pen to do the same thing, right? So a voting activity is comprised of three parts, really. You check in, so you've got the voter database check-in process. That's mostly electronic now. We bought some new e-poll books to facilitate that. Then there's how do you mark the ballot? In Georgia, we're marking it with an expensive tablet and then printing out a summary of your vote. You could do that with a piece of paper and a pen. And then finally casting your vote. And casting your vote happens by putting it through a scanner or dropping it in a box, right? If you went super low tech and we're going for hand counts. So all we're saying right now with the coalition is take out that centerpiece. Keep the system in place. Keep the check-in, keep the scanner, but just replace that $3,000 piece of equipment with a pencil and pen. Interestingly enough, in our largest county, Fulton County, we did a process analysis with them in December, I think it was. They use an extra, couldn't have been December anyway, they use an extra 25,000 labor hours every time for every election they deploy the BMDs with versus a hand-marked paper ballot system.
In one county?
In one county, every election.
And now BMDs or something like it are required. It's required to have at least one per polling place to provide access for voters with disabilities that would prevent them from using a pen and paper to mark a paper ballot. How much money could be saved given that they would have to have one BMD per polling place anyway by going to all hand marked paper ballots for those who are able to mark them?
So in Georgia, what that means is we'd have maybe 2,700 of them and we have 33,000 of them.
That's a bit of a difference.
It is a bit of a difference. And for every BMD, so the reason you save all that labor hours, separate from the cost of the equipment side, right? That's one piece of it. The reason you save those labor, for every time you have a machine, think about it with the machine in your pocket, your cell phone. Every time you buy a device, it has costs associated with it, right? Ongoing something or other. Well, in this case, these machines, the kinds of costs they have are, you've got to, if you're using electronics in elections, you've got to do something called logic and accuracy testing, which is checking them in advance to make sure that with the particular ballots for this particular election, if you try to vote, the vote comes out right. So you've got to do that up front. That's not an insubstantial time investment. You've got to pack them all up and move them from point A to point B. The ebb and flow from warehouse to polling place happens every single election like a machine. In small counties, that's a small project, but in big counties, that's a huge project involving truckers, and there's a very narrow time window when that has to happen, right? So you've got that cost. You've got costs of additional for the BMDs because you've got to protect them, and because they're a little complicated to operate, you need more poll workers in a polling place when you've got those instead of handing people a pen and paper. So it just each and every one of those little touches adds up. Over and above that is the cost of storing them. There's just a monster, and then long term, of course, maintaining them. Everyone came with a 2-year warranty program, but after that, you've got to pay annual fees. You've got to pay licensing fees for the software. So it's the gift that keeps on giving.
So the Coalition for Good Governance lawsuit is focused on the BMDs, yet I think it's important to mention that the other parts of the process that you have just described, the check-in computers, the scanners, the storage, chain of custody, which you didn't use that term, but you were talking about that in terms of transport, that there are security issues with all of those things. And so they just don't happen to be the piece that the lawsuit is about. So as we're speaking, Georgia is still doing some of the post-election processes following the general election and preparing for the statewide runoff elections on January 5th, and in some places, even between now and then, another set of runoffs in more local races. So one of the things that I'm wondering is what impact the ongoing lawsuit may have on those upcoming races. Because I know there have been interim rulings along the way.
There have been. The most recent rulings came in October, just before Election Day. There were 2 rulings. One was very comprehensive, 147 pages. If you want to read it, go on coalitionforgoodgovernance.org. It's linked there. It's pretty fascinating reading. And the judge essentially said, gosh, you have the probability of success when the full hearing comes around. You presented all kinds of credible evidence, but it's so close to the election that I don't really think we can make a change at this point. But the Secretary of State better be prepared because, there's some real problems here, so don't ignore them. So that was sort of her first big ruling. She followed that up a couple days later with a very small ruling on a very small protection we had asked for, which was there've been ongoing and persistent problems of just performance problems with this equipment, with the check-in systems, the voters registering, and also with the BMDs. So the state election board had put in place a plan for emergency paper ballots, for paper ballots to be in the polling place ready for 10% of registered voters in case the equipment broke down. We were asking to have an effective paper poll book backup so that voters could be checked in. When the big switch happened in Georgia, COVID brought hand-marked paper ballots to Georgia in the form of no-fault mail absentee balloting. We're a no-fault state. So the number of mail ballots swelled from a previous high of about 250,000 in a race to close to 2 million for the June election and 1.3 million for this current election. So all of a sudden we're in the hand-marked paper ballot business in Georgia anyway, right? But we'd also seen problems with check-in with in-person voting. So we asked for an effective paper poll book backup because the system was having trouble figuring out when somebody presented themselves in person, what was happening with that mail ballot that they might have been asked for, might have been issued. Maybe it was lost in the mail. Maybe it was cast. Maybe it wasn't. So without an updated paper backup, we had a paper backup, but it wasn't updated right up to election day the same way the poll books were. So you couldn't use them to let people vote. You could use them to let them vote provisional, but not to cast their ballot in precinct. So we said, look, it's not the voters' fault that you've got this lag in the system. We ought to have a paper backup that lets them do it. She ruled in favor of that. Insanely enough, or surprisingly enough, our Secretary of State appealed it to a three-person court, and the appeals court, in a one-sentence ruling, said, "Yeah, we're going to stay that ruling from the judge." So right now that's been stayed. So we did not have an effective backup on election day.
So I just want to say, I know this lawsuit has been going on for 3 years, and I've been following it closely enough to know that this is not the first time that the judge has made a ruling that it's too close to the election to make a change that should actually be made to keep the election secure. And given that you didn't just file the lawsuit, but that it's been going on for years, from my distance, it seems unforgivable that she was in that situation a second time. And I don't really understand how that could happen. That, was it the 2018 or the 2019, was it a 2019 election where she said it was too close to the election to change away from these systems that are absolutely abominable. But it's really disturbing to me to have that happen again. I had the fortune, because of COVID, of being able to listen from my home in California to some of the testimony in your lawsuit in the last few months. And you in particular, I was really astounded by some of the testimony that you gave about a test that you did of the scanners and their accuracy. This is something you personally did, and I would love for you to take a couple minutes to tell our listeners about that. And this is about the scanners that scan the ballots that are either marked by hand or marked by the ballot marking devices, right?
That's right. And I'll say we use two kinds of scanners in Georgia. We have central high-speed scanners at the election office, and those are generally used to scan all of the mail ballots. But in precinct, we have a much lower grade of scanner in every precinct, and it's slower, and that scans anything that is voted in precinct. So we had seen anomalies in the scanning, even with the high-speed scanners and the mail ballots, that we discovered that it was undercounting some valid votes that humans would agree were votes. But we hadn't really had a chance to test the precinct scanners. I will say one of the benefits of the timing of, let's call it the awakening of the court, the bad news was that she didn't feel it was in time to give us the ruling we had hoped for. But the good news was we were able to move into a period of permissible discovery. So we've been able to get our hands on equipment, for example, and this scanning exercise was one of those examples. We would not have been allowed to access to the equipment to test it, other than that the judge, in fact, ordered discovery to begin. So I'll give some shout out to the court for that, because the opportunity to be up close and personal throughout this general election season has been resulted in a tremendous collection of evidence that eventually will get produced in court. So the scanner exercise we had noticed erraticism. So we wanted to test exactly to what degree that would be true. So we made our own test deck of hand-marked paper ballots, and we marked them in all different kinds of ways with different pens and different styles of marking. And then we started putting them through this precinct scanner to see what would happen. And ultimately, I found a particular ballot, one of many that was performing erratic, but I picked that one. And I decided to put it through the 4 different possible ways you could run a piece of paper through, top first, bottom first, front side, bottom side, 4 possible ways to put a piece of paper through. And much to my surprise, each of those 4 ways resulted in a different, what I'll call, warning message from the scanner. The way precinct scanners are designed, they presume a voter standing in front of them casting a ballot, and they're designed to give you a warning if there's something irregular about your ballot, if there's a race that you haven't voted in, or if it detects an overvote, or even if it detects something it can't figure out. It'll give you a warning message and spit that ballot back out to you and give you a chance to fix it, but it's telling you what's wrong with it.
And it's also supposed to be designed to be able to read a ballot any of those 4 ways that it's fed in.
Absolutely. It is supposed to be able to read them any of those 4 ways. And until I got into the weeds on this, I really expected that any of those 4 ways it would read it the same way. And so that was the shocking thing. When I couldn't get 4 of the same results out of the 4 different ways, I decided to then...
You got 4 different results, right? Not just they weren't all 4 the same.
That's right. I got 4 different results. And I decided to take each of the ways and put it through 5 consecutive times. So, 5 times 4 ways, seeking to understand, would it at least give me the same answer, always the same feeding direction? And much to my surprise, in no one of those ways did it ever give the same answer 5 times in a row. And that was really shocking to me.
And so tell me what the implications of that are.
Well, the implications of that are the voter doesn't know how their vote is going to be counted. It's just as simple as that. And if you can't know how your ballot will be counted compared to what it looks like when it leaves your hands, that is disenfranchising.
And so you said that it's different error messages, not different ways that the ballot was counted. Is that right?
Correct. So the scanner doesn't tell you, the precinct scanner doesn't tell you in an affirmative way what it counted for your particular ballot. It just tells you what the problems are. Okay.
So it's not, so if we know that it isn't reading it the same way each time, it could still be counting the votes the same way each time, but it sure isn't reassuring that it is, and it very well might not be.
It might be counting them, but it also might be not. There's this documented problem of the scanners seeing but deciding that a particular mark is not a vote. The scanner's basically making a decision that a mark is not a vote. And if it makes that determination, it's not going to give you a message. Mm-hmm. It's just going to determine it's not a vote and go through and not count it.
It's so disturbing.
It is.
So let's talk a little bit. There's 2 other things that I want to touch on here. And so the first one is, since the general election, we have seen in many places, including notably in Georgia, a new group of people who are concerned about the electronic voting systems, those being Republicans who have been challenging the Republican Secretary of State, saying they don't trust the system. At the time we're recording this, threatening to boycott the runoff elections. And I'm wondering kind of what insight you have about how that can, even though the work is nonpartisan, it's often people who are progressive, regardless of what party they are a member of or if they're independent voters, who have been pushing this cause of getting rid of the electronic voting systems. Now we have people who are on the right also concerned, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are about how we can best use their concern to help further the cause of transparent and secure voting systems?
Sure. So for sure, in our upcoming legislative session in Georgia, for example, it's likely that there will be legislation proposed about elections. So we are certainly hoping to channel this concern into a serious look at what we have documented are the legitimate concerns about the possibility that the system will not reflect the correct vote. At the heart of it, everyone wants to know their vote was counted as cast, right? Now, we could be cynical and say that this new excitement is based on the shock that the result came out not the way some people supposed, right? But in the end, where that's coming from is they feel like some votes might have been counted that weren't real votes, and maybe some of their real votes weren't counted. It really comes down to the same thing. Everybody wants to have confidence. So we feel like if we can partner with them on the fundamental shared value of wanting all legitimate votes to count, that we may be able to help bring the change about we want legislatively, even in Georgia.
That's exciting, and I would love to see that too. And so let's look at the upcoming Senate runoff, which is going to have the whole country's attention on it. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the most important ways that you who are on the ground in Georgia can protect the election to make sure that the results reflect the will of the voters accurately, and also what can people do who are far away and want to support?
So if you're far away, I would say one thing is, if you're far away, be very cautious about what voices you elevate. One of the challenges we're living with right now is with the awareness of Georgia elections, the Georgia Senate race on everybody's mind, is folks who are wandering into it new are elevating voices of what I'll call non-reason. So we're putting out a lot of fires in Georgia right now based on some inaccurate information that's being passed around. So one, if you're new to it, don't make a lot of noise until you understand it really well.
Good point.
There's some amazing organizations that are working on getting voters to turn out. I think one of the dangers of special elections is that no matter which party you're affiliated with, one of the dangers of special elections is that only the most hardcore supporters generally turn out. And I happen to believe that we best decide elections in America when everybody votes. So there are some proven groups in Georgia that have been working on the ground to help marginal communities and communities that typically don't vote a lot in special elections. So, you can seek out and help some of those groups to do their groundwork of making sure that everybody in Georgia understands there's an election and you can vote and here's how to vote.
And so people even far away can do that with text banks and phone banks and postcard writing, and people Absolutely. On the ground in Georgia have the additional options of going door to door, participating in get out the vote events around the state.
That's right. And we have seen through the audit we just concluded, it's already starting with the recount that we're starting today. With the scrutiny comes some more vigilante type groups. And so there are some groups making a lot of what I'll call bad noise. We have to understand our election directors at the local level, 159 counties worth of election directors and staff have been working insanely hard since early October on this. And they've had some extra burdens due to the audit that turned into a full hand count, the recount that's going on now. Oh my gosh, in Athens, Clarke, just to the north of me, they are literally running early voting right now for a special election that is on Tuesday. And they're having to start today this recount requested and legally authorized by law by the Trump campaign. And they're having to prepare for the beginning of early voting for the Senate runoff on the 14th of December. So the burden
that's
on
more
them
complicated.
Is crazy.
That's more complicated than I think a lot of people realize, because you have things, for all kinds of reasons, including that if the same equipment is going to be used, it can't necessarily be reprogrammed for the next election while it's being used for a current election. And
A good example of that is the special instructions for the counties, and there's about 5 of them, I think, that are running these special elections on Tuesday, that they have to complete their recount of the presidential election before they can start to scan any ballots for their Tuesday election, right? So they've got it even, everybody else gets just finished doing their work by the end of the day, Wednesday. They've got to complete it before they can start counting for an election that's on Tuesday. It's a crazy burden on the local election folks. And so in that kind of a climate are where mistakes will get made, right? But in a suspicious climate, when mistakes are made, they can get confused as conspiracy nuts, right? So the noise gets even louder, the scrutiny gets louder. It's tough.
And I think that brings up the important point that because there's a lot of bad noise happening, to use your phrase, that people who really understand about election protection showing up and signing up to show up and help observe and be able to document these procedures were followed, these things were done right, and to stand by the overworked election officials when they have unsubstantiated accusations hurled at them is a really important part of the work.
I mean, I was so pleased when I saw the map light up for the project, the poll tape project that Scrutineers were involved in and Smart Elections was involved in. The Georgia map lit up like crazy on that national map because of the work Coalition has been doing for several elections now. We had a running start on the poll tape project, and that's a really important piece of this that only people on the ground can do, but that helps spot problems before they turn into big problems.
And it's also something that someone could, if they were willing to travel to Georgia, but didn't have official capacity to be a monitor or a poll worker, et cetera, could be doing is preparing to photograph poll tapes that are posted outside the polling places on election night or the next morning, because that's a check against the later counts that emerge at the county level. So that's something people can participate in as well. And I know Scrutineers is going to be doing everything we can as an organization to protect the elections and to continue to support the Coalition for Good Governance's work on the ground. I want to really encourage people to go to your website. Do you want to give the URL?
coalitionforgoodgovernance.org.
coalitionforgoodgovernance.org, and we'll put that in the show notes as well. Please support them in every way you can. You're on Twitter, and the Twitter handle, it's at Coalition Good GV. At Coalition Good GV is the Coalition for Good Governance's Twitter handle. So you can follow them there. Any place else that they'll find you online?
We're also on Facebook. If you just type in Coalition for Good Governance, you'll find us on Facebook. You'll also find Friends of Coalition of Good Governance on Facebook. That's another place to start.
Is there anything else you want to say before we wind up?
Thank you for the conversation. And thank you for the work you're doing with Scrutineers. It's unbelievably helpful to have a nationwide network of folks who are all kind of sharing the same core value that let's have fair elections.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you and everyone you work with at CGG for your amazing ongoing, I won't say tireless work because I think it's tiring work, but for your persistence and your dedication to fair and transparent and secure elections throughout the state. Thank you, Jean Dufort, so much for being with us today.
All right. Appreciate it.
You can find rough transcripts of each episode at whowhatwhy.org/podcast. You're invited to get involved in the election protection movement by joining Scrutineers at scrutineers.org. That's SCRUTINEERS.org. Whether you're a seasoned activist or advocate or have never before worked for social justice, you're welcome. Both Who, What, Why and Scrutineers depend on your support to keep our work going. If you appreciate what we do, please donate through our websites. You'll find Who, What, Why at whowhatwhy.org/donate. Remember to check your voter registration and help others do the same. And vote in every election. Thanks for listening.